On November 21st, 1992, Tom Monfils disappeared after a workplace dispute. A day later, his body was found in a pulp vat with a 50-pound weight wrapped around his neck. Over 30 years later, exactly who killed Monfils remains a mystery. Welcome to the Monfil 6 podcast. My name is Damon Schneider.
My name's Mike Putchell.
Today's episode is entitled Who's to Blame? So we left off episode 1 talking about how Monfils was very nervous. He was playing basically a game of cat and mouse over an audio tape with Keith Kutzka. Can you elaborate on that, Mike?
Sure. So there was a situation with the tape. Again, just to recap briefly, Monfils had called the police, turning Keith in, stealing that cord. Keith got in trouble for it. He was suspended. And so now Keith is kind of looking for revenge, I guess you could say, or at least to find out who's responsible for his suspension. And so now Tom is extremely worried, rightly so, understandably so, that he will be found out as the caller. And he's been calling the Green Bay Police Department multiple times, making sure that that tape of the recording of the phone call won't be released. And he also gets word around the mill that Keith is trying to get this tape. So it's a kind of a game going on right now where Tom's trying his hardest to make sure this tape doesn't get released to anybody, and Keith is trying his hardest to get this tape. So somebody has to end up getting what they want.
So let's listen to Monfils calling the Green Bay Police Department right now.
There's no way he would miss my voice. I mean, we're talking about a guy that is like, a biker type. He has nothing to lose in life anyway.
Well, that usually fits the character mold for those kind of people, so.
But that doesn't do me any good if he decides, that someday in the middle of the night I don't show up at home.
Okay, so Monfils on the tape then, he describes Keith as being kind of like a biker. What do you think he meant by that?
I'm not really sure exactly what he meant by that. I don't even know if Keith was a biker, if he had a motorcycle. I certainly don't recall Keith being a part of any biker group. So I'm not exactly sure what Tom meant by that. I think really he was just belittling him, trying to make it sound like he's just not a very good guy. So I don't know how true a lot of what he said was. I don't know if there was much truth to that.
Yeah, I agree. I think that he's trying to sort of tell the Green Bay police that Keith is a dangerous fellow, and Monfils associates, probably like the biker type with being a dangerous fellow. And so if he equates the two, then the police will side with him and make sure that they don't give him the tape. So Keith ultimately does get the tape, though. He pays a small fee. So there's miscommunication amongst these individuals in the Green Bay Police Department. Obviously, they did the wrong thing. How do you think that they could have better communicated to not allow that to have happened?
Well, it helps when you just have to go through one person. I mean, I remember reading in the book and from the documentary, there were quite a few people that Keith spoke to at the police department. And then I remember, I believe he had also spoken to, I think, the city attorney or something like that. And I know Monfils had spoken to more than one person as well. And I think that's part of the problem, is that there were so many different people that were giving different information and also clearly not really knowing what the protocol was, because Tom, when he called in to the police, he talked to that guy with the police department, and he kind of is like, well, that shouldn't be released or something. Nothing like in the affirmative, like just saying like should. That doesn't mean it will not. It just wasn't very certain. And then I think too that the issue is, like, the guy that he spoke to, that Tom spoke to in these calls, I don't know if that guy was reporting these concerns to anybody else, any higher ups in the department. So I just think that that's the main issue. There were too many people involved that were kind of relaying misinformation to both people, both Keith and Tom.
I think so too. Yeah, it's interesting that in the job that I work at right now, I have to go through training procedures. Every year, they send me the same sort of videos to watch, just to make sure that I'm aware of violations in regards to email protocol, but especially not clicking on malicious malware and things like that. So these videos that I see every year, they're kind of ingrained into me now. I know exactly what to do in the situation when I see a funny looking email. But again, this is 1992, and that didn't exist. So
Sure.
yeah, there were probably big gaps in training amongst the various individuals in the police department.
What's remembered lives. Losing someone precious from our lives is the most painful event that one can endure. Seasons of Life Memorials is dedicated to making sure the person you lost is never forgotten. We work with you to help you craft a film about your loved one's life that can be viewed at the gravesite. We can also help you create a film about your very own life that can be viewed in the obituary section of your hometown newspaper. Imagine that, your friends, relatives, and neighbors viewing your own unique story and how your life truly did matter. Visit our website, seasonsoflifememorials.com, and follow us on social media today to start viewing what we can do for you.
Monfils, he's at work on the morning of November 21st, and Keith comes in with a tape player and the tape, and what does he do?
So Keith, again, he is overjoyed that he finally got this tape, and he knows who this is. He recognized Tom's voice when he listened to it the night before, if I remember correctly. And so he's so glad to be able to finally rat him out, essentially, is what he wants to do. He wants to humiliate him. And so he makes this whole scene. He decides to go around, and he's got this tape player. I'm envisioning like a like almost like a boombox type thing, that has a cassette tape player attached to it. And so he goes around to all these different little stations. They call them coops at the mill, and he's playing them. And then finally he ends up going to one of the coops that Tom is taking a break in. And then this is where we go from here. He kind of he relays to Tom. He plays the tape, and that's kind of when Tom realizes he has the tape, which I can imagine there being like a just a huge pit in his stomach at that point, because he thought that this wasn't going to be released, and here it is.
Yeah, so this is the culmination of several days of an intense anxiety. He's probably sort of freaking out at this point. And Keith actually says the words, "Name that tune," basically accusing Monfils of being the rat. And then what happens? Tom goes back to work, but around 7:50 a.m., Mike Piaskowski notices that Tom is missing from the machine that he's supposed to be working on, and he calls to the supervisors to let them know that Tom is missing. What can you say about the time frame in terms of the death of Monfils? Could this have taken place in just a few minutes like the prosecution laid out?
You mean the whole beating and killing that they say happened to him?
Mm-hmm.
I would lean towards no, especially with all the people they say are guilty of doing it. I mean, this is 6 people, so, and we'll get into later the connections of all these 6 people to each other, but knowing the minor connections between all these people, it's not very believable.
It's hard to imagine that these working class guys could have sort of killed Monfils and dragged his body across the factory and stuffed him into the vat in that short time period. The problem is that the police didn't really have any other ideas as what happened. Can you tell me exactly how was Monfils' body found?
Yeah, what I remember is so they had been searching for his body for hours, into the overnight hours and into the early morning. And they searched the whole building from really top to bottom. And if I remember correctly, these pulp vats were kind of the, like, really one of the last places that they had checked, because it did take quite a bit of effort to look there. They had to drain them, start draining them at least. I mean, these are huge containers of material. I don't remember. Do you recall, like, how tall these things are?
My estimation would be about 10 feet.
Oh, okay. I thought they were even taller. But so obviously there's a huge volume of pulp in here, of paper pulp, and they have to drain them, and that takes a lot of time. So it was there that they started to see human remains.
And then the police are called. What about the police's their investigation of the crime scene? In your estimation, was it professional? Why or why not?
Well, what I can remember, I know as far as the professional aspect of the question, the book made a big deal out of somebody making a comment saying, like, "Way to go, Kutska." I remember that. And I don't know if they ever found out who said that. Do you recall if they found out who said that?
I think it was just one of the police investigators on the scene at the time, kind of pointing to the fact that right from the very start, they had kind of found their person who they were going to pin the blame on.
Yeah, so to me, when you said professionalism, that's what came to my mind, because that that's not professional to say something like that, especially if that was a police officer or somebody on the police department who said that. It really does kind of, it almost in some ways makes light of it a little bit to me. It's almost a bit um, like they're joking in some ways, but then they're also kind of placing some bias on the direction of the investigation. Um, if they believe that it was a murder, because this was obviously um, right in the early stages of the investigation. I mean, even if, I'm sure we'll get into this a little later, a possibility of it not being a murder, even if this was a suicide, they still could be potentially saying "way to go, Kutska," as blaming him, because I think this whole thing is um, the police department knew what had been going on with this whole tape race to get this tape, and they knew who Kutska was, that he was trying to get it, and so I think they were, whether it's a murder or a suicide for Tom, I think that they're saying, like, this is all because of you, Keith, essentially. You couldn't just let it go, this tape.
I think that's a good point too. Either way, Kutska bears responsibility, as if it was a murder or a suicide, or maybe something even more sinister.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, an autopsy is performed on the body, and the coroner determines that it was a murder. Are there any problems with how the coroner may have determined that it was a murder?
Yeah, that whole process seemed a little muddy to me, but um, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, I, I believe the police probably should have looked at the possibility that the blade within side of the vat actually caused the injuries to the body. They didn't spend enough time sort of pursuing that. It was interesting that if you look closely, the blow to the back of Monfil's head actually matched the dimensions of the blade that was inside of the vat.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I remember the blade, and again, this blade is like down at the bottom of the vat and stirs up the pulp. Uh, I remember the police, they didn't take that blade, right? They didn't confiscate that as evidence.
To this day, it may still be in use at the paper plant.
Right. Yeah.
And now for a quick break. Memento mori. Remember, you must die someday. However, your life can be remembered forever by contacting us at seasonsoflifememorials.com. We are here to teach you how to create a film about your life that can be seen at future grave sites, as well as within the obituary section of your very own newspaper. Contact us today at seasonsoflifememorials.com. Mike, can you say something about what exactly is the letter film in regards to our business?
Sure. So the letter film is one of the multiple options that Seasons of Life offers. It's another memorial video, a shorter memorial video, where this is a film where it kind of gives a brief, I guess, synopsis of one's life, some of the highlights of one's life, and in some ways it can sound as if the memorialized individual is narrating it in some ways. It again just highlights some of the great key moments of their life over the years, and it is a bit of a uh, kind of in the style of like a biography, a short biography documentary.
Indeed, and in your own father's letter film, you were able to include a little bit of a voicemail that he left. How did you come about that?
Yeah, so I had actually been just looking through my phone. I actually forgot that I even had those, and I was just going through it. I thought it would have been great to include some sort of uh, audio component. I knew I didn't have any video of him. We didn't really film anything, or we're not a big picture family. But I was going through my phone, and I was amazed that I still had voicemails from him. I actually still have them. I guess I should thank myself for not deleting anything. I don't delete texts or voicemails. Um, so I had those, and I was like, I had a few of them. Most of them, there wasn't really anything substantial to put into the video. It was just, like, it's me calling, just seeing what you're up to, call me back. But then there was one where it was more substantial, and it had a bit more meaning to it. So I thought it would be a great way to cap the memorial film, and I think it turned out great.
And we're back. So a long time passes. A year goes by, and the police don't have really anything to go on. What do you think was going into the minds of the detectives at this point in regards to the case?
So again, I think they I would definitely say they were leaning towards this being a murder or just something foul play related. Suicide never seemed to really cross their minds here. Um, so I again, with the "way to go Kutska" line, I really do think that they had their sights set on him. And we can talk later on too. Uh, there is an element as well about how the Green Bay Police Department, they were partially to blame for a lot of this too, with getting the tape released. So I think that they were bearing some responsibility for this, and they didn't admit that. But I think, kind of as a way of, uh, you know, I'll just say this. I think they wanted to wrap things up quickly and have somebody to blame quickly to make it seem like we're gonna take care of this case as quickly as possible, find justice for the community, for Tom and his family, because we're not going to admit that we screwed up, but we know we screwed up. So we're going to come down hard on who's responsible here.
I think so too. I think a lot of times the police department in any region of the country, whenever there's a murder, are under a lot of pressure to solve the mystery as quickly as possible. But with this case, there really wasn't any evidence until the Fox Den. Can you explain just briefly what occurred at the Fox Den?
Well, that kind of depends on who you talk to, right? Because some people will say a lot happened, and others will say it was just a meeting at a local bar. But anyway, what the attorneys, the district attorneys will say happened there is this was just a gathering over the 4th of July weekend. Keith and I think 3 other people were just getting together for the 4th of July, just socializing. And again, this is just a local bar in the Green Bay area on the outskirts. And, the four of them were just getting together, and you're going to have to remind me, Damon, the names of these people.
It was Keith, Keith's wife, and some coworkers from the factory. I don't want to go into it too much at this point because we're on a further episode. We'll spend almost an entire episode just on the events of the Fox Den. But basically, what happens is someone claims that Keith role played what happened the day that Monfils died, and from there, 6 coworkers, Keith and 5 other coworkers, are arrested and put on trial together. One of the reasons they're put on trial together basically is they didn't have enough evidence to convict each separately. So John Sikowski, the DA, thought that a good way to basically capture all the bad guys at once would be to try them all at the same time. Hence, we get the Monfils 6.
In closing, ladies and gentlemen, there's a saying up there on the wall: justice, the hope of all who suffer, the dread of all who wrong. Now, I'll tell you, I've used that once before in a case, and God willing, I'm sure I'll have an opportunity again. But there will never be another case where that saying means as much as this case. On behalf of the state, on behalf of this community, and on behalf of the family of Thomas Monfils, I implore you, don't let them get away with it like they have for 2.5 years. Don't let them get away with murder. They're all involved. And not to hold them accountable, each one of them accountable for what they did, wouldn't be fair, it wouldn't be right, and it wouldn't be the truth. Please return with a verdict of guilty as to each and every defendant. Thank you.
Do you think that was fair for them to be tried all together?
Well, and I'll add, too, that he also was doing it for the taxpayers' savings.
Or so he
supposedly.
claimed. Yeah, he kind of had a little smile on his face when he said that.
Yeah. So, yeah, he's a good guy in that regard, caring so much about the taxpayers. No, I don't think that was fair at all. The 6 all tried under one trial. It's extremely difficult to pin evidence on one individual when you've got the jury who can't really decipher between the defendants, and we'll get into it later, but having the jury decide this for 6 people when really they all had, you could say, if they had any involvement at all, they had different levels of involvement. So having the jury decide that for all 6 of them is completely unfair.
So the Monfils 6 are arrested and ultimately convicted. And years go by, and eventually in 2001, Mike Piaskowski is released. Can you tell us a little bit about how he's released?
Sure. So again, I'm not fully understanding the legalese of it, but he had been appealing his conviction for pretty much from day one of the conviction. So he had been appealing to different levels of the court system, and so he got the writ of habeas corpus issued, and one judge for the state Supreme Court granted it. And this is supposedly an extremely rare thing This does not happen often. And in 2001, Mike was able to be freed and these convictions overturned.
And eventually then, two authors would go on to write a book about everything after meeting Mike Piaskowski. They are somewhat related to Mike and his family. Can you explain how they're related?
Yeah, one of the writers used to be married to Mike's sister. They were no longer married at the time of the writing, but they were at one time.
And this book is entitled The Monfils Conspiracy, and basically lays out a very detailed and thoughtful case as to why the Monfil Six should not have been convicted. Next week's episode, we will start to get into the individual chapters of this book. New episodes of the Monfil 6 podcast drop every other Friday. Please join us again. Thanks for listening.
Have you recently lost a loved one and want to hold on to their memory forever? Would you like all of the world to view what their life had been about? Seasons of Life Memorials is what you are looking for. We create individual and unique documentary shorts that will allow anyone visiting the gravesite to view the documentary and your memories of the loved one. Contact us today to set up an appointment at seasonsoflifememorials.com.